Okay, guys, thank you so much for being a part of my mailing list. And I promised you a before and after Milky Way edit video a long time ago now. I'm really sorry about that, but I wanted to release these at the same time as my Lightroom presets. They're now ready. They've been through public testing, and I'm really excited to release these. But I'm going to go through this before and after Milky Way edit completely free. I'm going to show you how I edited this image of Cime di Lavaredo, and straight off the bat, I'm going to let you in on a big secret. This image is actually a panorama. A lot of my images are actually panoramas, um, because you end up with this image which is very high megapixel. So you get a much more detailed image, and then the noise in the image is a lot smaller relative to the size of the image. You're sort of shrinking the noise down. You can barely even see it. So doing a panorama, you get much higher detailed images and images that you can barely see the noise because the noise is so small. So I'm going to start with the original raw files. So it was these five. So these five images were. I mean, I could have taken this image at 14 mm, but I decided to use the 24 mm, and take five landscape orientated shots to create a portrait image. Now, with the individual raw files, um, I'll just reset this and go from the start. So each individual raw file, the first thing I'll do is the lens correction. Now, because I'm using a Samyang lens, Lightroom doesn't know which lens I was using because the lens is manual. It doesn't communicate with the camera. So I have to tell it that I was using the Samyang 24mm, but most times it'll do this automatically. It was really important to do the lens correction because this will give you a better chance of stitching the panorama together. It fixes that distortion and vignetting. And then I'll come into the basic tabs, bring a bit of detail out the shadows, nothing too much. If you go too extreme with the shadows, you start bringing out noise. So normally just a little touch just to get some detail out the shadows. Same with the blacks. I'll drop the highlights quite significantly because that will help darken the sky and balance it with the foreground. And then I'll lift the whites just to give the image a little bit of a pop. I don't touch clarity or dehaze because they really affect the noise in the image. And contrast, I'd rather add contrast in my own way, so I stay away from that. Now we'll come down into the detail tab and we'll get rid of the noise a little bit. So we'll just lift the noise reduction, and I've zoomed into this area where there's a bit of foreground and there's a bit of sky, and I've zoomed into 1:1. That means 1 pixel of my screen is 1 pixel of the actual raw file. This is the only way that you should sharpen and remove noise in an image. You should never trust this view. You have to do it from 1:1 zoom. So I'm going to lift the noise reduction. For me, it's normally about 20 to 30. As you can see, at 20, most of the noise is gone in this case. But yeah, normally about 20 to 30. The color noise reduction, I normally lift to 40 to 50, depending on the image. There's not much color noise in this image. The shadows are actually quite clean. So I'll just go for 40. But if the shadows were looking a bit purpley, I would think about increasing that to 50. And then with the sharpening, this is the Lightroom default sharpening. Now what happens is this is sharpening the entire image. So it is sharpening the noise in the image. We don't want to do that, so we can use this masking slider here. And at first it's not really obvious what it's doing. But if you hold Alt or Option on a Mac and then you lift that masking slider, Lightroom will start looking for edges. So anything that is white will get sharpened, anything that's black doesn't get sharpened. So when you start off at 0, the whole image is white because everything's getting sharpened, and as you lift the masking slider, Lightroom will start restricting the sharpening to edges, and somewhere about 60 to 70 normally does it for me, and somewhere between 40 or 50. Just keep an eye on high contrast edges, particularly the horizon. You don't want halos to appear. You just about start to see a bright edge forming around to Cime. We don't want that, so I'm going to come down to 40. Normally 40 to 50 is my go-to. Now I'm going to fix the white balance a little bit. I mean, you can do that by eye, or if you're struggling, you can sort of turn up the vibrance and saturation so you can really see what colours are in there. And you kind of want, you know, the sky needs to be relatively blue. The light pollution certainly needs to be yellow. I'd rather have a bit of yellow in the rocks compared to blue. So I think somewhere about there is good. And the image is a bit green to me, to my eye at least. So I'm going to lift the tint a little bit as well. I can reset that. Yeah, and that's looking pretty good. So now I'm going to select all of the images in the panorama. And I'm going to synchronize the settings. I'm going to check all so that every image has the same settings. And then I'm going to press G to come into grid view, right mouse click, photo merge, panorama. Now Lightroom's going to stitch all those images into a panorama. Once it's done, I'm going to up the boundary warp just to stretch the image out, fill up those edges, straighten things up a little bit, and check the projections. Spherical looks too elongated for my liking. Perspective is just as weird. But if you go for cylindrical, in this case, that for me is perfect. And I'm going to merge those images, and then Lightroom is going to throw out this panorama. Why are they always fucking hoovering? Anyway, right, so we've got our panorama, and when you try to edit it, you'll see that it's got all the edits we made to our original raw files. So what I like to do is just right mouse click, edit in into Photoshop CC. And then just do something that's not going to affect the image. So just add a curves. Just come down to this little circle here. Oh, can you even see that? I just move the screen down a little bit. So if you come onto this little circle here and add a curves layer, and then you can close and choose save yes. Close Photoshop. Whoop. Now back in Lightroom, I've got two panoramas that look exactly the same, except all of these are now reset. So I've got a bit more room to play. I'm going to drop the highlights to darken that sky. I'm going to lift the whites to give the image a bit of a pop. Add some contrast to the image. And get a bit more detail out of those shadows. And a little bit out of the blacks. So I basically like to start with the image sort of overly bright, too bright. This is way too bright. It doesn't look like night, but I want to try and get all that detail out before I selectively darken the image. So I want to darken that sky, so I take a graduated filter, drag it over. Now, some people, when they want to darken stuff, they obviously go straight for the exposure, but the problem is you're going to darken the Milky Way at the same time. So a good way to darken the sky is to increase the contrast, because that will darken anything that's dark and brighten anything that's bright. So you see the Milky Way gets brighter, but the sky gets darker, but it also gets more saturated. So you kind of have to counteract the saturation using the saturation slider. If that hasn't darkened the sky enough for you, you can just do the whole thing again. Increase that contrast. Bring back the saturation to a lower level. Don't want stuff to get too oversaturated yet. Don't want stuff to get too saturated at all, but we can fix the saturation later. So that's helped me darken the sky a little bit. It's helped give the Milky Way a bit of a pop. And one thing I really like doing is adding a vignette to my images, so I'm going to use a radial filter, -0.5 exposure. And I'm just going to draw on this vignette. You can add these as much as you need. Do a little bit of an elongated one. And again. Then I might add a graduated filter just to darken this foreground in a little bit. There we go. Now I'm going to fine tune the basic settings a little bit after that vignetting, but let me just show you the before and after of vignetting, because vignette makes a huge difference. So that's the before, that's the after. That's where the magic happens. That vignette just frames your subject, it draws the viewer in. That's where you can start making everything look like night, but still retain all this lovely detail. So I'm a big fan of vignettes, but you know, customly shaped vignettes, and you can build them up nice and slowly. Now, this image is obviously a bit desaturated, but I don't like the saturation slider because stuff just gets horrible very quickly. Vibrance is a little bit better, but still just makes things look really garish and horrible. So I come down to this calibration tab, and I much prefer the blue primary saturation here. It's a really much more pleasing saturation, but you will find the blues get saturated a lot quicker. So you can come up into the HSL tab, come into saturation, just bring the blues back a little bit. There we go. And I might add a bit of saturation to this yellow light pollution, because just having a little bit of really saturated area, so just these little two areas, just kind of goes a long way to make the whole image feel saturated. At this point you might want to adjust the colors a little bit. Like that blue is looking a bit too aqua for me, so I might push it into the sort of darker blue, the sort of more navy blue. And there we go, that's a lot nicer to look at. Let's check the yellow. Yeah, so you can either add a bit of green or a bit more orange. You might add a bit of orange just to sort of warm up that light pollution a little bit. But look at those adjustments. A little bit of color adjustment goes a long way. And that's about as far as I'm going to go with this image. It's looking really nice now. That panorama creates a very nicely detailed image with, you can barely notice the noise, you can barely see the noise because it's now really, really small. I'm just going to show you quickly how much easier and how much quicker it is to edit with my presets. So you're starting with this base image. I'm going to come into my presets, Alan Wallace Astro workflow. Start with lens correction, but we don't need to do lens correction because this is a panorama. And these are all my tonal presets. Now the image is a bit bright, so I might darken the image a little bit first. And then I'm going to check over my tonal presets. You've got Asteroid, which is my go-to. Black Hole, you've got these crushed blacks. Dark Matter, similar to Black Hole, but you've got faded blacks. It's very filmic. Fireball, you've got Iridium, which is this really nice, glowy, ethereal kind of feel to it. Meteor, another one of my go-tos, a Meteorite, which is like a crunchy, contrasty version of Meteor. I think I'm going to go with Meteor. Noise reduction. Now, these noise reduction presets have got my fine-tune sharpening. I go into a lot more detail with these presets compared to what I just showed you. So I'm going to go with noise 20, and that will get rid of everything nicely. The white balance. Do we need to fix the white balance at this point? Maybe a little bit. There we go. Then you choose one of my color presets. In this case, Venus is looking really nice. And then comes my local adjustment tool. So I'm going to use the darken sky. I'm going to use the darken sky preset. I'm going to darken that sky. without darkening the Milky Way. And you can change the amount of that preset. And then I'm gonna go for my vignette. Again, change the amount, really draw that in. And change the color of that blue a little bit. Nice. Maybe bring the saturation down a little bit. And then I'm going to use my Milky Way pop brush. Just make that Milky Way stand out a bit more. Nice. Might add another vignette. Turn the amount down a little bit. Boom. And I'm going to fine tune the global adjustment. And there, boom, done. That's it. There's a couple of other brushes in there. You've got the star glow. You can add a glow to the bright stars. Star reductions. You can dim the stars on the edge of the frame. And the light pollution reduce if you want to reduce the glow of any light pollution. Light pollution reduce if you want to reduce the glow of any light pollution. You also got foreground pop, so you can just bring a bit of detail back in the foreground using this brush. Nice. Yeah, give those presets a little look, see if you find them useful. They also come with some much more in-depth editing, sort of tuition tutorials. If you do decide to use them, make sure to use the hashtag Alan Wallace presets, because I would love to share some of your images on my Instagram and my Twitter and YouTube and social media channels. I really hope you found this video useful, guys. I really hope you start getting some better results. If you're going out to enjoy the night sky anytime soon, I wish you good luck and clear skies.